Well, last episode I said I'd be talking about more art this episode, but I'm not going to do that. And what I've mostly been working on is procedural dungeon generation, but it's not ready to show you yet. This is Irison, son of Arison. Welcome to Devlog number 6. One of the things I've been noticing while developing the game, and this is one of the problems of developing from scratch, is that I'm missing some of the, let's say, quality of life features that you would often find in a game engine. I have no logging capability, I don't have memory tracking, there's no debug console. So I decided that I wanted to put some of that right. And the first thing that I've been doing is creating a logging functionality. I'll show you how it works. So if I run the game, and then I can open the log file created. As you can see, it's in HTML, and it's actually live updating. So when I do some dungeon creation, work in progress, you can see that it immediately updates, and it'll do that each time I do it. There's a slight lag, and I've also made it so that you can hide or show depending on where the data is coming from, and also based on the severity of the reports. So the most detailed information is in trace. So for example, it's telling you where each of these nodes are, and that's the very noisy information, so you might want to turn that off, and you might want to just concentrate on a particular kind of error. So you might want to just look at the warnings, and you can see that I've got 2 warnings here. I'm not going to explain them. I'll talk to you about procedural generation in another episode. So because this is a combination of HTML, which is happening in the generated file, and the C++, which is creating the HTML file, it's actually quite spread out in the code base. So when you want to log something in the code, you just use one of these functions. Because trace is so noisy, I've put that on its own define, so that you're not always doing it. And these are just convenience functions to make it a bit more usable in the code. I mean, obviously the simpler and easier to use your logging functions are, the more you'll use them. And so the code separates into a class log, which actually does the logging, and in principle you could have multiple logs, although I don't know whether I'd be using that or ever use that. And then a second class logging, which is entirely made up of static functions, and that provides a single point of access all through the code that these hash defined convenience calls then attach into. So the first thing that the logging does once it's opened the log file is it does insert header, and this is a very simple function. It just loads the data from the specified file and dumps it into the new log file, and what that actually contains is this log header, and this is written in HTML. It's an incomplete document because it's going to be filled out from the bottom, and it's basically a big chunk of JavaScript which will fill out the side menu that's this part of it, from the tags that it finds in the log, and count the number of messages, and also continually watch for changes to the file so that it can update it when that happens. And it all works pretty well. It seems to so far. There's also a frame setting thing, so that every frame it tells the logging what frame it's on, and then if something is output during that frame, it puts in one of these frame headers so that you can easily distinguish between frames. That's not very relevant for what I'm showing you here, but for a lot of debugging purposes, the start and end of the frame is really quite relevant. And I need to go through the code and fill out this kind of logging, because at the moment there's a lot of code that, because I wrote it before I introduced the logging, I'm not logging anything from, and I probably should be. And the other thing which I need to add to this to really make it fully featured is, and I mentioned this in the first episode, I use these things called hash keys to replace string lookup. So strings get converted to a single number, and that single number is not meaningful, so I need to put in, for debug builds anyway, a reverse lookup so that I can get something meaningful out to the log. So that's actually been quite a bit of work, and I think rather than returning to procedural generation straight away, I'm going to try and create some more of these kind of quality in life improvements. And so I think next episode I'll be talking about them. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.